It is now 10 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second, excuse me, for the second Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council's Regional Resiliency webinar series, followed by a brief stakeholder meeting. We appreciate everyone taking the time to join us this morning. My name is Rebecca Harp. I'm the Executive Director for the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Esma Oda to continue introductions and to get started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for being here. My name is Esma. I'm the Deputy Director with the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council. As Rebecca mentioned, today's session has two parts. First, we will go into our webinar. This is our second webinar series as part of our resiliency work in the region. And this webinar will discuss preparing for rising waters, smart planning for resilient communities, followed immediately by a short stakeholder working session where we'll gather your input to help guide regional resiliency efforts. Our goal today is to share practical examples of resilience planning and then hear directly from you on your priorities, needs, and opportunities across the region. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Supi Patricia is the principal for the research strategies with the Water Institute. Supi, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. Supi Daylander. As Esma said, I'm the principal research strategies at the Water Institute. I have a background in coastal hydrodynamics and sediment transport. But a lot of my focus the last 15 years has been, to be honest, I used to run a lot of really complex hydrodynamic sediment transport models and then got kind of frustrated that the last mile of someone actually using it to put it in practice and management was often the weak link. So I've gotten more into decision support and really directly how to pull information in. So should I go ahead and try and share my screen, or do you want to do more introductions?
Yes, you can. Thank you for your introduction, Supi. And yes, if you'd like to, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Fingers crossed. Are you able to see a screen?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. So always the last part to check. So thank you, Rebecca and Esma and the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council for the opportunity to speak today. Really excited to be able to kind of give a taste across a few different projects and efforts that the Institute has been able to be involved in. I think are relevant to the region in different ways and in terms of supporting communities. Um, so for anyone who hasn't heard of the Water Institute, we're a nonprofit based out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but we have people and projects all around the Gulf and beyond. I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida, so a little north of the Planning Council's area. We may not be kind of what you have top of mind if you're thinking about a nonprofit. A lot of nonprofits do a lot of really great work in advocacy. We're non-advocacy, so we don't. It's an important role for different organizations, but that's not just not our role. We're really in a lot of ways about connections. So really thinking about how to have data science models really feed into decision making, the science that really supports different types of decisions and incorporating that into management in practical ways. We're not very big. We've got a little under 100 people, but we have breadth across policy, policy analysis, ecology, hydrology, engineering, sediment. Because really what we're trying to do is be able to plug in different ways as a bridge to really enable, science-informed planning, collaboration across different groups and with different groups to really kind of maximize being able to bring kind of robust processes and data into supporting decisions, because that's what it's all about is helping communities, on the ground. So like I said, today what I'm going to do is kind of breeze through at a really high level with a taste of some things, and I'm happy to dive into anything either on this call or afterward. I'll pop up my email address afterward to kind of give a taste of how that kind of bridge role and works and across different things, resiliency planning and vulnerability assessments, kind of moving beyond a plan into what that can look like on the ground for community resilience, filling gaps and needs in sort of hazards and resources and what that can look like, and then do a little bit of a deeper dive on some work we're doing with MacDill Air Force Base. It's obviously kind of a very specific type of community in terms of it being a DoD installation, but it's really a good example of how different things can come together in different ways and collaborative approaches to support management and enhancing resilience. So some tenets that we have when we're approaching resilience planning, as I said, it's all about being collaborative. It's all about bringing in different perspectives from within the community, different expertise. Where there is existing data or existing models, really being grounded, in science and data, and making sure that actions and plans are actionable. You want to be ambitious, but gotta balance that it also is something that can be taken through. And then, again, consistent with that, just being really, transparent. That goes hand in hand with being collaborative. Making sure everyone is on the same page. So what we found, what we bring, what we've worked on in a lot of our projects is kind of an overarching framework that enables that kind of data forward and science forward, robust decision making, collaborative decision making, but that is very flexible to meet different community needs. So what I'm showing here is actually from working with the city of Jacksonville. And Anne is actually going to talk about kind of the end, after developing a plan, how does that go into practice and what's actually been on the ground, that this isn't something that just sits on the shelf. But I just kind of wanted to show and talk through really, really briefly what the process was for developing that resilience plan. And again, this is something we kind of customized to different things. But this is really how we did it for Jacksonville. We we always want to start with the vision and the objectives. A lot of times there's a tendency to want to kind of jump into what can we do. And one of the things that we've found is really valuable in resilience planning is what are the community's priorities, not just in resilience, but other things that need to be considered to make sure that any plans that are developed don't inadvertently make another issue worse, or where it's possible, there could be other benefits to the community. Really thinking through the risks and vulnerabilities. So obviously in the state of Florida, I have to think about Resilient Florida and the guidelines for vulnerability assessments, but also where does the community need other things layered on top? Where are the real, vulnerabilities? What are the data that can support that assessment? Where is there already good data and don't need to do anything else versus where is there really like key gaps that are the most limiting for making really effective decisions? Then what we'll do is move into identifying the opportunities. For the city of Jacksonville, and specifically, one of the things that we found is that Jacksonville is a big city. It's very diverse in terms of the communities, and because of that, there's not really a way to develop a framework where you could just develop a set of actions that you could just plug and play anywhere. Because for example, it looks very different. Communities that are sort of more toward the heart of the city, historic neighborhoods that are very walkable, the homes are very close together, smaller lot sizes, that's a very different in terms of thinking about what their priorities are and their vulnerabilities are compared to a more suburban area, a little bit farther outside the city where the lots are larger, things are more spread out. They might be located differently compared to, where there might be flooding happening. So what we developed for Jacksonville, in coordination with the city, was a place-based typing. So basically to be able to, we want to make sure that everything is applicable to all the communities, but it's also not doesn't work really well to try and, make every community have its own thing. So what we did instead was develop these typologies, things like historic walkable neighborhoods, where communities we could categorize what the vulnerabilities and needs were, in a little bit more generalized way, while still capturing the importance of that community uniqueness and what the vulnerabilities and strategies might be. Then what we have to do is move into an alternatives analysis. This is the part that always looks very different for different communities, because this might be a desktop exercise of kind of walking through. It might be very detailed modeling if there's very specific concerns. In the case of Jacksonville, what we did was kind of a hybrid. we developed out a kind of lightweight model that looked at, if you apply different strategies to different areas, these different places, how would that, impact potentially things like population density? And again, because that's very different, that, what the goals are and what the ideal is very different depending on the community that you're in and what their interests are. So there we did that kind of analysis, looked at, how many people would be in or out of danger as far as the floodplain, et cetera. And then that can form the basis of what, the priorities are. And again, Anne's going to really talk about the good stuff of that in action and what's now been put on the ground, but this is the planning approach. And what we've done, we're that same overarching approach. We've applied in different areas, and so this is just sort of kind of capturing what the diversity of that is. Again, same overarching framework, same overarching ideas, but the objectives are very different. The level of analysis is very different for each of these because it's got to be driven by the community. So a few specific examples right now, we're working with the city of St. Petersburg on a vulnerability assessment. Again, consistent with Resilient Florida, but layering on top what some of the specific concerns are, multi-hazard concerns are for St. Petersburg specifically. And then another big focus here is thinking about how to provide and communicate risk and vulnerability data in a way that can eventually lead to a citywide resilience plan that pulls in across efforts that have already been done. Don't want to leave anything behind, and that also is effective. Communication of these concerns with residents is a big concern in St. Pete and in a lot of areas. Another example, this one is in Walton County. It's a little different because here it was really focused on looking at opportunities for public-private partnerships. So what it started with was a half-day long workshop that really pulled in these different entities that don't, they're not sort of obligated to work together, right? There's no sort of regulatory connection, but they're all doing different things that need to build together. So it was bringing together the representatives from those entities to look at opportunities, challenges, how the county can think about pulling together key priorities and key gap filling, and then again vulnerability assessment. In Escambia County, the work that we've done there is much more targeted, again, based on what the community needs are there. So in Escambia County, one of the big concerns was kind of incompatible or nuisance uses adjacent to neighborhoods, and what how the land use development code kind of overlays to exacerbate or to improve that situation. And so really that was grounded in, what are the community input on the concerns? We're not the decision maker, and that's the county, but where is, looking at those sort of policies or codes and where the opportunities are to kind of make everything a little bit more consistent with what the communities are wanting, what the county is wanting, et cetera. Kind of moving from that planning into what that can look like on the ground for implementation. One of the things I wanted to highlight is work that our Community Resilience Center is doing. So really the Community Resilience Center, the community, it should almost be in a bigger font, right? Resilience is really important. Just go down, big community, resilience, and then center, because it's really about what the community specifically need. They've been doing a lot of work in Southwest Louisiana, but really thinking about across the Gulf. So those focus areas that are shown, we didn't make this up. We didn't say, these are the most important things that we think people should be thinking about. That came out of talking to the communities, what is really the needs. Some of these are going to look very much like things that are concerned in Florida. So Southwest Louisiana, insurance affordability and availability, that I think all of us can relate to. So again, in that case, it's looking at what is happening now. What are the policies that might be contributing to that? What are the opportunities? Where that could address that need. Another thing that the center is working on is the Community Resilience Catalyst, and so this is really fun and exciting because it's about in some ways how us or our experts or whoever could become obsolete, because it's enabling communities to be able to strengthen their own system based on what their priorities are. So helping to make communities aware of what pathways are for increasing community resilience, what's worked elsewhere, that kind of awareness and knowledge. Technical support, where there are things to kind of plug in to catalyze more, effective, kind of understanding what are the data needs. But then one of the things that when I heard about this is one of my favorite things. is things like a buddy system where, if a community, want to have, or city want to have expertise coming in, locally, but that same local expertise really understands the local community, but may not have sort of the experience looking broadly at what has worked well elsewhere. So this idea of buddying, buddying up project managers, buddying up different folks to be able to kind of support, to provide that expertise, where again the goal is then that the buddy isn't in the picture anymore, right? It's getting the communities to be able to have that in-house expertise and develop it in a way that's really targeted toward what they need and what they want. Switching gears a little bit, that's not always the case, right? Like sometimes you have, cities and counties that they know what they want to do. They have the infrastructure for managing it, but there might just be a data need, right? There might just be a gap in terms of the specific information that's needed. And so an example of where we've worked with communities and cities on that is our work in flooding. So what we do here, again, never want to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great information available out there on things like winds, coastal water levels, offshore work that NOAA does, et cetera. So the MetGet, and Floodwater are basically mining that information because, again, don't want to reinvent the wheel, but then putting that in a framework that is specifically useful to communities. So Flood ID is basically flood hazard visualization and decision support. And what we do is layer in models that basically uses that available data, lays out the model to be able to get even at, at varying resolution, but even down to the street level, to then provide that information. Again, in this case, cities know what they need to know, but they just need to know things like, where are streets going to flood or evacuation routes going to flood. So in this case, it's filling that specific need of, what of the information that's needed in, near real time as these risks evolve. Kind of similar to that, sand and sediment. So I'll talk about McDill about nature-based solutions, and that's obviously a very, very big concern, a very big priority in a lot of areas. All of nature-based solutions just about are constructed of sand. And what a lot of communities have found in different areas is that it's expensive, and it's getting more expensive as different sources for sediment and sand that are closer in are being used, or that there's conflicting uses for them. So this is one of our priority areas as well, is looking at, what are sediment needs? Where are there opportunities? So in a lot of cases, people are dredging out channels because they don't want the sand and sediment there. And that doesn't always find its way to useful locations for various reasons. Sometimes it's engineering, sometimes it's policy, sometimes it's just because being able to do the calculations for benefit cost and working with the Corps to get it to the math to work out. All of that. So we're really thinking about, where we can plug in different ways to support that, making sure that sort of no grain of sand goes wasted, so that these nature-based solutions can get on the ground efficiently, be cost effective, et cetera. And that includes looking, offshore. So in a lot of cases, it's great to be able to beneficially use sediment, but maybe it's not enough. Again, one of the things that we're seeing more and more in different areas, and including in areas along the coast of Florida, is that those areas that people have gone and tapped and dredged, different communities have pulled from, they're getting fewer and farther between. So really being able to target doing sediment searches to find different sources of sediment, to again be able to manage that, to be able to meet the needs for nature-based solutions. A lot of times people think about things like marshes and mangroves, but even beach restoration, right? That's a nature-based solution too, and that relies heavily on sand and being able to find the sand. So for the last few minutes, I'm going to kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive. So I know you've gotten the shotgun part of the presentation, where again, I'm happy to dig into more of those details or follow up later. But wanted to take a chance to dig in a little bit more with y'all on one project. That's kind of exemplifies some of the work that we're doing, collaborating, we're doing with different engineering firms, and in this case with the DoD and the Air Force. So MacDill Air Force Base is located along the Inner Bay Peninsula in Tampa Bay. Probably most folks are aware of this. The base is vulnerable to coastal erosion, to flooding. One of my favorite stories is they rescued a manatee off the runway after Helene. They have, they really are interested in something nature-based to kind of increase their resilience, particularly because there's some sand sources. Again, thinking about that holistic management. So the Tampa Harbor Navigation Channel is being deepened. Some of that beneficial use material is targeted for different places, but not all of it. There's also regular harbor maintenance that occurs. And then in the past, some of the sediment that's been dredged has gone into dredge management areas. So, sort of park there in those rectangular shaped islands, and, the Corps looking forward, they need to figure out what to do with their sediment. Is there a way we can kind of have a win-win here? We're using structured decision making. This is a specific technique. A lot of what I talked about in Jacksonville is actually kind of aligned to this, so it'll sound very familiar. It's not magic. Again, it's just kind of giving a framework to work through things in a very objective and systematic way by sort of defining the problem. What are you really trying to achieve? What are your objectives? What are those alternatives and consequences? Really think through the trade-offs. One of the things that we're doing with McDill that we're finding is really effective in working with the base as well as in different communities is what's called rapid prototyping. And so what this means is we basically just go around that whole wheel as quickly and cheaply as we can and identify what the real concerns are, what the needs are, not just in terms of for putting things on the ground, but in terms of data, in terms of modeling, so that we can really focus it in on what's needed. And that's where we're doing now. We're sort of going back through and doing a more quantitative analysis, not doing everything, not the kitchen sink, but focusing in on what's needed to make these nature-based solutions actionable, permittable, beneficial to the base and the neighboring communities. So you kind of see the background color change. This light purple color is the rapid prototyping. So all of this was done in calls and in a workshop, very lightweight. We worked through, what are the basis concerns? Who are the relevant authorities? What's the permitting process to make sure that we're talking to those regulatory agencies? What are the local and private organizations that have concerns, but also have expertise, have data? Again, what can be leveraged? How can we really build on what's been done? And then what are the constraints? So funding, sediment availability, again, is always a concern. And then, what are the regulatory concerns? Because don't want to design something that isn't going to be able to be permitted. Then we really worked through with the base on what are the objectives. Again, not just the resilience objectives, but what do we have to think about to make sure that we don't create a whole new problem in trying to solve an old one. So some of the things that will really be consistent with community concerns as well. Anyone we're thinking about resilience in terms of flooding, coastal erosion, wave attenuation. They want to be good neighbors, want to make sure they don't build something that's going to exacerbate erosion downstream. But then there's other concerns, things about like maximizing the extent of SAV. Submerged aquatic vegetation is a huge concern in Tampa Bay. Where there's possible other benefits to habitat or species of concern. But then again, these are DoD very specific, but every community has their specific concerns. In the case of the Air Force, they have to be very cognizant of if they build something and it attracts particularly large type shorebirds, that's a real risk for aircraft. That's a safety concern. Similarly, things like perimeter security. Marine Patrol needs to have access to different areas. They need to make sure they have line of sight. So, vegetation type solutions that might work for some areas really well wouldn't necessarily work for the base if it's going to create a security concern. So again, this is for the base, but the same process works anywhere of really thinking through what are these communities' concerns? What are the things that, they know are there, but that maybe if you're just thinking through the resilience lens, you might miss and accidentally miss an opportunity for benefits or cause an issue. And we work through the alternatives with them conceptually at first. The three that were identified are creating shallow shelf habitats, basically just making things shallower to attenuate more wave energy, reestablishing historic longshore bars, again, would lead to wave breaking. That would also help SAV, or constructing a subaerial barrier island. And then we thought about three different areas along the base. These have different exposure to the bay, so they have different concerns. But then also that southwest area, sort of similar to what we did in Jacksonville, right? Different areas have different concerns. That's where the runway is. So there's much different concerns, much higher level of concern for things like bird aircraft strikes where the planes are taking off. We then went through a workshop, rapid prototyping workshop. All of it was based on subject matter experts and the base coming together to say, okay, how do these alternatives putting these in different areas, match up to those concerns. And so what that looked like, and again, keep in mind, this was all done kind of in a day, sitting around the table, very lightweight to do this kind of evaluation. And these are the outcomes from that. The different colors are the different alternatives. The purple is that shallow shelf, orange is the longshore bars, green is barrier islands. The kind of sections are the different kind of categories of concerns, things like seagrass, habitat, surge and wave attenuation, bird aircraft strikes. And then the shading is the different concerns. And what kind of came out of that was people thought that, these nature-based solutions would have mostly positive outcomes. A lot of those things are going up above the center line. That's positive is a positive outcome. But we were able to drill on what are the really specific concerns. So how much wave energy reduction? People thought that there would be wave energy reduction, but someone sitting around a table can't determine relatively how much wave energy you're gonna be able to attenuate with an island versus shallowing the shelf. Where will the sediment go? Similarly, that really is something that for the to be able to really understand this would need a model. What would the impacts be to seagrass? A lot of concerns also around the bird aircraft strikes and potential for downstream erosion. So now armed with that, what we could do is then do another pass through. We worked with the base to identify funding sources. The next round was funded through NIFWIF, or is being funded through NIFWIF and the Department of Defense REPI program. So working with them also on the funding side to be able to then, part of that was be able to illustrate these are really the needs for the analysis that supported getting funding. And now with that funding, what we can do is really take the next step that's going to move this into design and then eventually the build. So what we did was take those concepts and developed an initial set of alternatives. So putting these things on the landscape. Then what we'll do is do our analysis. I'll talk about that in a minute, refine that, and then move into design. Again, really, if you're old like me, you recognize this reference. We're looking for no whammies, right? We're looking to make sure that we can work through everything, thinking about regulatory, sediment supply, benefits, so that by the time we actually get to investing in the design, that we've got something robust. And we're working with our engineering partner, Michael Poff and his team at CEC on developing these alternatives. So I'm going to show these. There's a few principles to these. So these are the three alternatives that we're working with right now, that we're analyzing right now. We wanted to go big. So these are as big as possible because what we wanted to do is really isolate how much wave attenuation can you get? How much BASH concern, how much bird aircraft strike concern are you going to get? What are the regulatory concerns? Because we want to get that end member, particularly think about regulatory. If they're not concerned big, they're not going to be concerned when we scale these down. But what we didn't want to do was put in very small alternatives. And then this question being like, hey, that's not really a lot. Could I get more wave attenuation? What does that look like? So that's what these are. The one on the left is barrier islands. The other thing we did is sort of isolate the concepts so that we could really drill into what their impacts were. One on the left is barrier islands. The one in the middle is the longshore bars. And the one on the right is shallowing the shelf. Very briefly, what we're doing now, again, guided by that first round, is drilling in and targeting the data analysis and modeling to what's needed. For the wave energy, storm surge, and sediment, needed a hydrodynamic model. We weren't going to be able to get at the informational level of detail needed without it. So that's what we've done is we've built out a Delft 3D variable resolution model, kind of the model that can actually tell us where is the sediment going during storms, what's the wave attenuation, both in storms and outside of storms, what are the trade-offs between a barrier island, how much do you get of wave attenuation do you get from that versus shallowing the shelf. Similarly, we're working with partners, again, no data left behind. Tampa Bay Estuary Program has done a lot of work, as well as Southwest Florida Water Management District. One thing we did find is that they have a lot of great transect data on seagrass, but because we need to know how those alternatives are going to perform into the future and they haven't been built yet, what we're doing is using remote sensing of satellite imagery to fill in the gaps, use that data to build out a representation to look at where the SAV is now, and then relate that to the output of the model conditions to say, all right, what are the conditions where SAV are doing well? Now we can leverage that model again and say, okay, into the future, if I have barrier islands, now I've reduced the wave energy and I'm in the zone where I could get SAV, I'm likely to get, an expansion of SAV into these areas. Again, it's all about putting those puzzle pieces together to think about those trade-offs so that the base can really decide what they want to do. If they get more wave energy reduction, but maybe it's at a cost of a little bit of BASH, what does that look like? Like maybe that's okay to put an island on the east side away from the runway, but really thinking through those trade-offs. And then the last piece to it, really thinking about the constraints and doing it at the front end. So sediment is a big deal. We've done a sediment analysis to look at how much volume is available from these different sources. The deepening project, anything that hasn't already been spoken for, maintenance, dredging, et cetera, so that we can then, the base can think about what they want, and then we can make sure that the sediment is there and that it's feasible and that they can be scaled according to that. Or maybe we need to do phasing because of if there's a need to use recurrent maintenance dredging. Same with the regulatory constraints, working hand in hand, talking to Army Corps, talking to the state, talking to the port, which is the local partner on the deepening project. What are the concerns? If we go big, where are your red flags? Luckily, we haven't really run into any red flags. But we have run into things like mitigation concerns, and then when there aren't any concerns, that again, when we go to the next step, which is this is the point we're kind of are right now, is finishing up that analysis. We can lay all this out very systematically to say, okay, you're going to gain a little bit of, you're going to gain this much wave attenuation if you build an island, but here's the bash concerns. What's your relative concern? Maybe we can put this over here. So we can really systematically then put this all together into an alternative that provides the maximum benefit, doesn't have any unacceptable negative impacts in terms of the base, in terms of those concerns for security, is permittable, and has the sediment sourcing. And then we'll do all that. We're going to have a workshop working with the regulatory agencies and with partners to put together that. And that's what we want to then take and start putting into design to carry forward, so that when by the time we get to that point, it's about kind of refining and targeted adjustments, not about, oh, great, we built something and we've got a roadblock that nobody's going to be, that's going to be insurmountable and we have to go back to the drawing board. So that's actually all I have. Again, McDill kind of shows that process and hopefully some similarities with Jacksonville, that process of thinking through the problem, the risk, the issues. What are your objectives? What can you do? And then being very thoughtful about what are the impacts across those different objectives, because there's always going to be trade-offs, so that you can make informed choices. So I'm always happy to talk about any of this, now or later and whatnot. There's my email address. And again, thank you to the Planning Council for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Supi, for that insightful presentation. We'd like to give Annie Coglanis, the Chief Resiliency Officer for the City of Jacksonville, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Coglanis with Jacksonville, and it's always great to hear what Supi's working on. We really enjoy getting to work with the Water Institute on our resilience strategy, and I'm excited to share a bit about what we've been doing since we published it. With that, am I good to start sharing a screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. No matter how many times. Yeah,
Yes, we can see that.
Is it
Yes.
presentation?
You might need to speak up just a little bit. It's a little hard to hear.
Is it full screen though?
It's not full screen.
Look at that. You're getting the swap. Okay, now are you seeing it in full screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, so Sufi shared a bit of the process that we went through to develop our resilience strategy. And I could easily, spend an hour just talking about how we developed it. But I think for today, what I thought I would focus on is really what we've done since we published it. Anytime I talk, I always like to throw out the definition of city resilience in the future. People realize we're talking about not just one threat of flooding, but kind of a multi-hazard approach. So for the city of Jacksonville, types of shocks and stresses we looked at were really a full range of risks. Environmental risks from flooding and hurricanes, from high wind events, wildfire, to non-environmental shocks like cyber attack or infectious disease. We also looked at these kind of slower moving stresses, and again, heavy emphasis on environmental impacts, sea level rise, erosion, The slow encroachment of heat. Summer's getting just incrementally hotter. But then also a lot of non-environmental stressors like poverty, lack of access to transportation, lack of access to healthcare. These are things that we really have to be thinking about and thinking for as a city. And then we also, and again, I wish I could share a bit of the vulnerability assessment that fed into this strategy, but a lot of what we spent time focused on is how do these intersect? And often we feel an acute shock is really made worse by the presence of an underlying stressor. So if a family is already living below the poverty line and then experiences a flood event, that flood event is going to impact them harder. If we don't have access to transportation and then we have an evacuation order for a storm, that's going to be a larger hurdle for your family to overcome. So a lot of time was spent on how do we measure these shocks and stresses, and then also what is like the lived experience of our residents. So that kind of risk analysis fed into a lot of planning work that happened before I got to Jacksonville, using our local mitigation strategy, doing the creek projects with poison Hogan. There were a number of conversations that had already taken place in Jacksonville as kind of a result of Hurricane Irma and Matthew, that suddenly led to, okay, we really need a comprehensive strategy. And in developing that strategy, we worked with the Water Institute and a really brilliant team of consultants. And a lot of participatory planning went into this, bringing together stakeholders whose professional expertise aligned with resilience work, public engagement. We did a really fantastic survey with Duval County public school students in middle school and high school. We found is that 83% of them are deeply concerned about climate change and the future of Jacksonville. So really, we tried to get as many voices in this process as possible. And what that led to was the Resilient Jacksonville strategy that we published back in 2023. It's 45 actions and 90 sub-actions that showcase what Jacksonville should be doing over the next 50 years to prepare for its future. I'm not going to hit you with all of that, but what I thought I would do is kind of give you a glimpse into the projects that are moving right now. And then if there are any of them that, the group wants to dig into and learn some, I'm always happy to come back and dive into some of them. I'll move quickly through. One thing I will flag before I move on is we structured this in 3 scales: system, sites, and people. Systems were really things that we needed to do citywide. Sites were kind of very narrow work, kind of where a parcel or an asset needed a resilience intervention. And then the people section is really focused on how do we work to get together better as local government, how are we working with independent authorities, how are we supporting our residents differently. And then what you'll see kind of to the right of those scales is the adaptation approaches that we used. And the state of Florida has 4. We really expanded it because we felt like the type of holistic planning work that we wanted to do for Jacksonville had some more levers that we wanted to pull. So some of these might look familiar: protect, preserve, relocate, those accommodate. Those are ones that the state uses as well. But this idea of how are we growing in a resilient way? How are we transforming corridors for resilience? How are we setting up everyone to thrive as we're doing this resilience work? Those were kind of new framings that Jacksonville used. So if you're interested in looking at the strategy writ large, that's kind of how it's organized. And it's available on our website if you want to dig into it. So projects that we have underway right now that are kind of we've been working on since we published it and are moving is the first one was really, oh no, this has been happening to me a lot lately where it's automatically advancing. So I'm so sorry if this script will need to just fix why that's happening on all my slide decks. So the first kind of thing that happened after we published the strategy was actually establishing a formal office of resilience. And one of the things that our office was tagged with is really making sure that science and data remain at the forefront of how the city is making its resilience planning decisions. This was part of the resilience strategy development. We know it's how we want to implement. And so one of the big projects that we tackled first and foremost was developing a compound flood model to support decision-making on flooding. So in Jacksonville, we experienced 5 types of flooding. I think this is pretty common for a lot of parts of Florida. 2 primary types of coastal flooding, high tide flooding, and then storm surge. And then on the rainfall side of things, we have riverine flooding. People may not realize that Jacksonville, in addition to having 3 beach communities and the intercoastal waterway, we also have the mouth of the St. Johns River and 59 major tributaries and branches of the St. Johns River within city limits. So this is really a web of water, and that riverine, the interactions of that riverine system meeting that coastal system gets very complicated. And then we also have stormwater flooding, which a lot of parts of Florida are dealing with as well. We get these heavy rainstorms overwhelming our drainage system. You can be pretty far away from a major water body, but see localized flooding due to stormwater. And then in Jacksonville, what we find is really the most common type of flooding that we're experiencing is compound. So when 2 or more of these are happening at the same time. And I think it's very intuitive to understand compound flooding, but we found it's very hard when we were doing the strategy, we found it was very hard to measure and model that. So it makes sense to kind of the average resident that if it's rained for a week in Central Florida and the St. Johns River is at a higher level, and then we get a king tide, or then we get a wind event that's causing surge, that's going to change the amount of flooding we see on the ground. If we were to have it rain for a week in Jacksonville and our soil is saturated, and then we get another heavy rain event, that's going to change how quickly water is flowing into our creeks and tributaries and causing them to overflow their banks. So we found that we've had a lot of people are understanding why this is a threat, but then we wanted to actually be able to measure that. And the thing that we found is it's not as simple as, let's say, 1 foot of storm surge and 1 foot of rainfall equals 2 feet of flooding. These things can really compound by a magnitude. And so we actually partnered once again with the Water Institute to actually develop a compound flood model for the city of Jacksonville. So we started with modeling the entire St. Johns River watershed. So this is a big chunk of Florida. This is the largest river system in Florida. It flows south to north, which is uncommon, and empties out into the Atlantic Ocean in Jacksonville. But because things that happen in other parts of the watershed impact the river and its dynamic, we needed the model to stretch that far. But we have a much higher resolution mesh over Duval County, the city of Jacksonville, that allows us to get really refined detail on how flood is moving. So this is just a glimpse at how that mesh looks over the neighborhood of San Marco, which is a kind of a low-lying, almost bowl-shaped neighborhood that has a lot of issues when we have storm events, with the bulkheads being overtopped, but also when we get a heavy rain event, that water kind of sits and isn't able to quickly drain out because of the topography of the area. So we can now see in great detail how flooding is moving within this neighborhood. This is just a screen grab from some early findings from the model looking at the neighborhood of Springfield, where we have Hogan's Creek, and we get a lot of chronic stormwater flooding. So within those 2 red lines is Hogan's Creek. We've had some flood information from FEMA data sets and NOAA on the floodplain there, but not as detailed because this is an area where compound flooding is really a problem. You get both tidal influence and it's a major drainage outfall for the neighborhood from rain events. And then what we've never had the ability to look at before is the area that's in that yellow circle. So how do we actually measure and map the risk of flooding inland away from these bodies of water, away from the designated floodplain? And so by having this compound flood model, we're now able to start to see where those chronic drainage spots are, and we can now start to weigh that against other parts of the city instead of only relying on calls from residents that are saying this is a problem, we're having flooding here. And the goal with this is also to be able to get ahead of that. So as we're getting more heavy and intense rain events, we can start to predict and anticipate, okay, this is a low-lying upland area that may have a drainage problem if we get a heavy rainfall event. What infrastructure is needed on the ground? And so this is kind of a very new picture of how we are able to measure and map and statistics about flooding. The other thing that has been really wonderful about working with the Water Institute on this project is because they're an applied research nonprofit, they've been able to apply for National Science Foundation grants that are allowing us to use the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center to run lots of scenarios. The computing costs end up being really prohibitive of kind of running as many scenarios as we would want. But for local government, we've been able to really save a lot of costs by partnering with an applied research nonprofit. This gives you a sense of how this data will appear when we're done with the modeling project. At this point, the model is built and we've run 100 scenarios through it based on 20 past compound flood events. and then toggling different rainfall intensities and different sea level rise projections. So what you're seeing here is a heat style map that shows all hundreds of areas that have been run through the model stacked on top of each other. So we can start to see where are we having chronic issues with flooding. And also, I think what this allows us to do is understand flooding. Instead of seeing it as a binary, you're in the floodplain or you're out of the floodplain, we can start to talk about every parcel in our city as carrying a probability of flooding. And that allows us to then make decisions based on kind of frequency and probability of flood risks, and really tailor our approach to the areas where we know we're going to have the most either extreme or the most chronic issues with flooding. When the project is done, because of this National Science Foundation grant, we're actually going to have 70,000 scenarios that have been modeled and mapped, and our heat map will reflect a much more refined probabilistic curve. So that's kind of the compound flood project. I should also say before moving on from this, Supi did share a bit about the flood ID forecasting tool. Because we did an extensive modeling project, we have also been able to then access the flood ID software and use a slightly lower resolution compound flood model that was built through this project that allows us to have flood depth, extent, and duration maps 1 hour after every National Hurricane Center advisory. So our emergency preparedness professionals are using this model and that software to make better decisions during an emergency and in the 24 hours, 72 hours before an event, to target our response at the areas where we're likely to see flooding from that specific forecast. So it's been a really incredible project to work on, deep science that's being used there, but also really real-time application, and again, really wonderful partners at the Institute. Another project that we've been working on kind of right out the gate from after we published the strategy was updating the city's land development regulations for resilience. So we stood up a committee back in 2023 made up of planners and engineers and developers, housing advocates, community advocates, and they were centered around three main goals. How do we increase the resilience to flood risk in Jacksonville while also increasing housing and protecting neighborhood character? So really this got to that adaptation approach of how do we grow in a resilience way? And what the developers came up with was using some of the findings from that compound flood model to kind of do a step back. So anywhere that showed up in those first 100 scenarios, we said that's not where we're going to want to encourage growth. Obviously, that's developed. We're in a very developer-friendly state. They can build wherever they're allowed to today. But what we wanted to do is propose where would we ideally want to see growth come online. We want that to be away from the areas that are being identified either from the FEMA floodplain or our compound flood model. And where do we have transit lines? Bus rapid transit from the Jacksonville Transit Authority, and the footprint of the Emerald Trail, which is going to be a network of shared use paths that are developed in and around the downtown core. And then also looking within our comp plan, urban and urban priority areas. So kind of trying to, instead of this sprawled outward growth for Jacksonville, we're recognizing we want to bring that density back in, but we want to do that in a really intentional way so that we're not accidentally building new housing in areas that are going to have a flood issue. So then the committee thought about, okay, well, how do we do that right now? I mean, certainly this was actually before SB 180, but now we know we have a lot more restrictions on what we're allowed to mandate of the development community. But really, even before that, the committee said, I think the easiest way for us to get this done is to make it desirable for developers to be building in this growth area. And so what they've proposed is a series of incentives that would offer density bonuses, height flexibility, lot flexibility, coverage adjustments that would make it more profitable for developers to build. And in return, in order to access those incentives, in addition to being in that growth area, we would ask developers to either set aside 20% of their units for affordable housing or do a combination of resilient design criteria. So increase shade canopy, increase permeability, and other kind of bioretention, things that would take either pressure off the city's drainage system or pressure off of the urban heat island effect. So we really felt like this was a very balanced approach that tried to, build more housing in smart places in ways that aren't going to put increased strains on the city. So this land development reg update is in legislation right now, should be going through the city council in the next couple of months. So kind of look forward to seeing how that moves forward. And hopefully this could be a really interesting model for how we do kind of resilient growth through incentive-based regulation. Other projects that we have, so those are kind of two of the biggest projects. That's why I went into great detail with them. But other projects that are underway right now, We got a grant from FEMA to do an extreme temperature analysis for Jacksonville. We've seen that roadways have buckled from heat in previous summers. We've had issues with kind of bridges having compromised, and so we really want to understand that in more detail. When we were doing the vulnerability assessment for flooding, there's really established criteria. When a hurricane is barreling down on Jacksonville, our EOC knows when to evacuate, we know how to work with all of our community partners, but we don't have that same framework when we're talking about temperature. So we are now working with a team of engineers to come up with an analysis for how we measure the risk for government-owned buildings, roads, our electric grid, bridges, water, wastewater from temperature. So either extreme heat or extreme freeze. And actually later today, we have some stakeholder working groups that we're kicking off for the remainder of the week with our partners that need to be involved in this. But the goal would be to have emergency operation standards and vulnerability assessment standards that mimic what we have for other hazards. I know how every bridge will perform at different flood scenarios or different wind speeds. I have no idea how we judge what materials or what era of development and different kind of building codes were in place for transit infrastructure for heat or freeze. And so this feels like a gap that we're able to fill. And our hope is that we can give these standards to other partners in the state and around the country to use in their own emergency planning. We also made a commitment in the strategy to develop an urban forest management plan. That's underway right now. We've done a tree canopy assessment, and this will be during priority growth kind of planting areas and will really help benefit the city's tree commission and urban planting project. We're also working with our Duval County Public Schools and our transit authority to do tree planting projects. Another project we have going on is identifying the right shoreline type for different parts of the city. We're developing, sorry, this is driving me crazy. I'm sure it's driving me all crazy that's advancing, but apologize. We're doing a living shoreline suitability model. So we're looking at the section you see in yellow of the St. Johns River watershed, and then starting to better understand based on wind speed, direction, and kind of the way that waves are hitting that shoreline, what's the right shoreline type to be built there. Some sections of the St. Johns River are kind of really where we could see kind of natural vegetation, and like the Trout and Ribault rivers that you see here, where we could actually do some living shoreline interventions. There are other areas where we're having to dive further into detail. So you can see in our downtown, a highly modified shoreline is really needed, those kind of firm bulkheads. That's a very fast moving section of our river. But then there are other areas where we're actually trying to figure out in more detail, and we're working with some folks at the Corps to better understand the right shoreline type to recommend for that section. Projects that we've just now kicked off and we'll be working on it going forward. Many people might not think of this as resilience, but we're doing a food plan, really understanding food insecurity and supply chain from a resilience angle. So we're looking at 4 pillars of our food system: production, distribution, access, waste and recovery, and really seeing this as a cycle. So understanding where are we growing food, what are the supply chains that our urban ag and our agricultural community here in Jacksonville need, where is food being stored and how is it moving through the city, how much of our food is coming from other places, what is the relevance of our port in our supply chain for food. On the access side of things, we're thinking about grocery stores, but also restaurants, and beyond just how close are people to food access, are they near healthy and nutritious food? How do we make sure that that's affordable for residents? And then I think we have the most opportunities for innovation around waste and recovery, with exploring composting programs or other different food diversion programs and seeing if there's a way that can come back into production. So really excited. This, I think, kind of breaks from what people who are familiar with the Resilient Florida program might have considered part of a resilient program. But again, because Jacksonville did a multi-hazard approach, this has been a project that has risen to the top for implementation in next year. We're also looking at how we might be able to incorporate more green infrastructure across the city. So this is actually a rendering of a park that has just opened in Jacksonville, and the rendering I sometimes think is actually a photo because I can't tell you how similar the final project looks to this. It's really incredible. But it has a green roof, and we're exploring where we can put green infrastructure in other parks. We're doing a series of pilot projects across the city, and also starting to incorporate green infrastructure specifications into the city's low impact development manual. That when we're doing projects at the city, we can be all working from a similar playbook, especially the engineers in the public works department and the staff in parks that are doing parks. Along those lines, we're also updating the city's design specifications in public works around resilient design, thinking specifically about our roadways as places to either improve catchment of stormwater, size of pipes, and kind of slowing runoff so that we can kind of capture things during those heavy rain events. Also thinking about the streetscape as a place to help with improve pedestrian safety, adding protected bikeways, thinking of kind of buffers and ADA access, things that make those streets a better public value for our residents, and then also thinking about specifications that we can use around streets that make them cooler for our residents, that can help reduce the burden of the urban heat island effects of tree plantings, high reflective paving, high reflective painting, things that can really improve the heat response in Jacksonville. And the last kind of city project we have going on is an urban forest, a community wildfire protection plan. We got a grant from the National Forest Service to do this. We have, you can see here that our wildfire risk really increases as you get out from our urban core and into some of the areas where our developed plan affects really protected natural forest. And then the last thing, and I know I've thrown a lot at you, the last thing I really wanted to touch on is a project that we've partnered with the Northeast Florida Regional Planning Council on, and that's developing a regional resilience action plan. This was published this fall, and it has 34 actions to focus on improving resilience throughout the region. The document is structured around three pillars, I guess I would say. We did all of the Resilient Jacksonville planning project, and as we were doing that, there was a lot of interest in the regional council to also do that. And we basically said, like, Jacksonville has to put on its oxygen mask for assisting others. And so that, I think, had mixed reviews. I think people really wanted us to all be working together right away, but it felt important for Jacksonville as the largest metropolitan hub to really know the direction we wanted to move. But then once we published our strategy, we immediately started working with the regional council to make sure that we were publishing a document that could help other counties. And so these three pillars focus on the unique role that a regional entity can play in increasing resilience. And we worked really closely with them on this because there was a lot of conversation at the beginning about a county in Northeast Florida should do this, the county should do that. And we didn't feel like a regional document could really be telling counties what they should do. And we also didn't want the regional entity to inadvertently step between the state and county in information flow or resource flow. And so what we drilled down on are kind of three different roles that a regional entity can play to encourage resilience throughout the region. Actions that are facilitate really help make sure that individual counties are all working together. We're leveraging resources. We're sharing knowledge and making sure that we're all kind of moving in the same direction. So a lot of actions centered around facilitate. Guide was really thinking about making sure everybody has the same level of information. So sharing best practices, doing national, research on kind of national studies and case studies, and making sure that we all are operating from the same kind of playbook of potential resources. And then the third bucket, analyze, was really making sure that there aren't data gaps. So I think a good example of this is, in Jacksonville, we have really strong data. Other counties in North Florida don't have that. So filling that gap, actually pulling that analysis together and disseminating consistent data so everybody's working together. And after publishing that document, the regional council here in North Florida has kind of identified certain actions that they know they're going to be wanting to prioritize over the next year. And so much like the presentation I just gave to you all of here are the actions that we're knocking off after we publish the document. Similarly, this document is very implementation oriented, and so these actions are going to be tackled in the so with that, I know I threw a lot at you, but I really appreciate your time, and I'm always happy to come back if any of those projects really stood out or have additional questions.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that presentation. And thank you to both of our presenters. We'll open it up now for a few questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself, or feel free to add your question in the chat. Do we have any questions for our presenters? I know we have a few cities online. If some of this work resonates, if you think it might be helpful to learn more from the city of Jacksonville, if your current project work or future project work relates to any of these initiatives. And we have a question from Commissioner McDaniel from Collier County. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Commissioner.
How's that?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I am, as you are well aware, I'm somewhat technologically challenged. Um, I wanted to say I didn't really have a question. I wanted to thank both of our presenters. Those were both 30-minute force feeds with a fire hose. And a lot of data. And I'm assuming my question was mostly for us at the Regional Planning Council level. Where will this meeting that's being recorded be available to participants to go back and digest some of that information that was put out there?
Yes, it will be. And with permission from the presenters, we will also share their slides as well.
Okay, where at? That's my question, dear.
We will follow up with an email.
Okay, okay.
Rebecca, would you
The-
also consider posting it on the website?
Yes, I was just about to say that. We'll post all this on the website, and we'll share the link when we send that email.
Outstanding. I and in your sales pitch at the end about the necessity of collaborative efforts of municipalities that are contiguous, it sings to what a regional planning council should be doing, how it should be doing, collaboration, cooperation, best practices, all those things sing to the necessity of regional planning. Supi's diagnosis of the individuality of each one of the municipalities, counties, and so on is as prevalent as well. But we all need to be talking. We all need to be communicating about how and what we're doing, because when you push water one way, it's going somewhere else. And those are long-term impacts that need to give serious consideration as we're going along. So I have one last little thought that I'm going to share with everybody online, and and it is the rationale of what does width, breadth, and depth create? It creates volume. And so, and I know, Super, you had some discussion, and so did you, Ann, with regard to the environmental impacts. But give serious consideration as we're moving forward to um, creating volume within our waterways, both man-made and natural, so that when the inevitable flood comes, when the inevitable tidal surge comes, we've got a better capacity to manage that within our waterways, both natural and man-made, and give that some serious focus. I know there's an enormous amount of balance that needs to be brought in with environmental habitat, SAVs. I heard both of you talking about the submerged aquatic vegetation. But but I would really like to see some additional efforts on creating that volume within our natural waterways, all of our both man-made and our natural waterways. And I'll quit my sermon.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your comments. Ann and Supi, would you both like to respond?
Well, I can just share that I think I completely agree. I think volume is one of the biggest things that we need. And I think we need to break from the traditional way that engineers are thinking about volume as increasing pipe size. I think that's important in some places, and we're seeing with our compound flood model, where we have kind of pressure points on our drainage system. And so certainly upgrading the size of your drainage system is one way to do that. But we're really interested in exploring kind of surface level storage and volume for those heavy rain events. And then we're really encouraged by what we're finding from the shoreline suitability model that I shared a little bit about. And we still have kind of more refining of that model for certain sections of the St. Johns River system. But for some of those creeks where we've had issues with flooding, we're really encouraged to see that living shorelines or other kind of natural plantings could actually absorb additional flood waters. And so I completely agree with you that thinking about volume is really critically important. And kind of two projects that are underway right now. One is been constructed is a meandering of our McCoy's Creek, which is one of our constrained urban creek systems in Jacksonville. And just by daylighting that creek and meandering its flow, we've really increased the volume, and we're no longer seeing the overtopping of that creek that was causing a lot of neighborhood level flooding. So certainly we have a project we can point to as a success for that framework, but we also recognize that's one of 59 tributaries in Jacksonville. And so we're encouraged by the findings of that shoreline model that there may be others that are suitable for that type of intervention as well. So yeah, I agree. And I think it's something that we have to start working with nature instead of just thinking down the traditional great system.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comments. But the one thing that really resonates with me, when you're saying it's every community, every city, every county, has their own needs, but that collaborative approach needs to happen. I was really excited to hear more on the work the city of Jacksonville that has done with the regional planning council there that Anne was describing, because I do think that the key is to make sure it's a mosaic, right? So each part has to meet their own needs, but it has to fit together in a sensible way. And I think that comment really resonated. So yeah, I appreciated that.
Are there any other comments or questions for our presenters or for the greater good? Any questions from cities that we have online? Any counties? And any supporting staff? Hearing none, if you have anyone would like to follow up, please feel free to email Rebecca or myself, and we'll be sure to follow up with the recording and the materials from this session. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and transition into our stakeholder session. We want to thank you all for your questions and participation. And the stakeholder session will be focused on hearing from you. So please do not be shy. Feel free to unmute yourselves. The purpose of this session is to gather input that we will use at the Regional Planning Council to inform our regional resiliency planning efforts. We'll first start by giving a brief overview of the GeoHub and how we are working to identify 6 focus locations across the region with technical assistance support from Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Mesley from Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. Mesley, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you, Mesley.
All right. Well, thank you so much. As Esma said, my name is Mesley. I'm a senior resiliency planner at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and we are working to create what we're currently calling the Geo Hub for the Southwest Florida RPC. The name is still subject to change, I think, based on how things develop, but that's the current name. And I'm working with Ashley. That's our GIS director to develop this. She's doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of like data analysis, but she wasn't able to join us today. And the project will establish a centralized web-based platform for regional resilience planning and technical assistance. And we're basically building on the existing Southwest Florida Resilience Collaborative website, and it'll be an interactive ArcGIS online-based hub. So if you're familiar with those ArcGIS online apps, they're very user-friendly. They're very like visually appealing. You can do a lot of cool stuff with them, and you can present a lot of types of different data and information in a way that's interactive. So that's the idea, and it'll be used to strengthen the local and regional capacity to plan for climate and flood resilience. And some of the main components we're working on are first interactive maps. So we're building a regional resilience project map where you will be able to see what efforts have been done in the region, what projects related to resiliency have already been accomplished. And it can be like continuously updated is the idea. And that way you can see who funded those projects, who worked on them, who you can contact to get more information all in one place. And then we'll also have a flood viewer map that's going to have different flood layers using publicly available data, which is really nice because the federal and state agencies who have that data updated regularly. So it'll be updated automatically. And then that way you'll be able to assess the flood risk and also communicate that flood risk with your partners and community members. And then another component we have is the vulnerability assessment guide. So based on our experience, it'll be kind of like a lessons learned page. Also include some of the statutory updates to the requirements to give you just an idea of what to do, what not to do for a VA. And then we'll also have 3D visualizations of flood risk and ideally with some flood solutions. And the idea is for the public to be able to really see what the flood impacts would look like in areas that they're familiar with. So those like really like popular locations that everybody knows, what would 6 feet storm surge will look like in those areas, and really gets people thinking about, okay, this is what we need to, why we need to take action, right? And then we'll have a technical assistance network. So that will help facilitate the connection of local governments and other people working in resiliency with subject matter experts. So the idea is that people will be able to like put their name on there and offer their help and their expertise to the region. And again, all of these tools will be in a centralized hub for easy access. So we're planning to have a presentation, details to be discussed about when that will be, but we would really like to show you what those tools look like once they're developed in a couple months, and then how you can access them and navigate them. So more information to come, but that's kind of what we're working on so far.
Thank you, Mesley. Now,
and I'm happy to take any questions, sorry.
Yes, does anyone have any questions on the work that's being completed currently under the FDEP Resiliency Program? Okay, thank you, Mesley. Now we'll reopen the floor back to everyone for discussion. We're especially interested in hearing about any gaps you're seeing within any cities or counties, any current or upcoming resiliency related projects that you are working on, any data or technical assistant needs that you all have, and really how we at the Regional Planning Council can help connect you all to state and federal resources to help continue this work that you all are doing. Maybe to spark some conversation, I'll maybe start off by calling out each county within our 6-county region, and allowing for any comments for any cities within the counties, and an opportunity for the counties as well. So starting off with Charlotte County.
I'll jump in. The CHNEP is currently working with Charlotte County on their baseline vulnerability assessment, as well as kicking off a project called the Charlotte County Exceptional Ponds Initiative, to look at, the stormwater ponds, capturing and treating stormwater, and, reducing nutrient pollution. So those are the main projects we're working on in Charlotte County.
Thank you. Anyone from the city of Punta Gorda within Charlotte County online? Collier County? Anyone from the cities of Naples or Marco Island online?
Natalie Hardman with the City of Naples is here. I don't really have any comments or concerns at this point in time. I mean, currently we're working on funding for infrastructure improvements associated with our stormwater, wastewater, stormwater systems, wastewater systems, and that type of work. It's been identified that we have approximately $600 million worth of improvements needed on our aging infrastructure in order to bring those in line, and that's just the stormwater portion of it. To bring those in line to be more resilient with our with our adaptation plan and our resilience plan. So that's where we are.
Thank you for sharing. Are you actively looking for grant funding?
Sure, we're looking for all and any money we can find.
Okay. Have you considered EDA at all?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Rebecca and I will reach out then with more information.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. Last call for comments from Collier County or anyone from any municipality within Collier County. Glades County. Any resiliency work, projects, technical assistance requests, anything that we can do to help at the Regional Planning Council?
This is Tim Stanley. We're still finishing up on our vulnerability study. So we've had I would say a broad view of its presentation so far, but as we narrow it down, then we'll probably need help in the future on getting grants to resolve some of the issues that they find.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner.
And the CHNEP has dedicated funding to work with Glades County on their adaptation action planning once that vulnerability assessment wraps up.
Thank you, Serena. Henry County. anyone from Henry County or City of LaBelle? Lee County?
The CHNEP is also working with the town of Fort Myers Beach so they completed their 2025 vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. And so we're working on focus areas 15 and 16, which are two streets that are prone to frequent flooding. So this will be doing hydraulic modeling, H&H modeling, and looking at the stormwater systems under various conditions to develop recommendations for additional measures to mitigate flooding there.
Thank you, Serena.
I guess for City of Sanibel, we have completed our vulnerability assessment and a surface water master plan. We're currently working on our adaptation plan that will, have additional projects that'll come out. The surface water master plan had quite a few as well. Yeah, so I think while we're working on these, since we do have projects going on, we are also continuing to look for funding for all sorts of things. But I will note that both our vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan were funded by Resilient Florida.
Thank you, Ashley.
I have more of a question than any kind of update. I'm with the Greater Pine Island Civic Association, Nadine Slimak, and I'm just wondering how community groups like ours that are not part of government entities can advocate for our communities. Obviously, Lee County is doing a lot, but it's got many, many communities that they need to work to make more resilient. And I'm just wondering how we as a community group can fit into the work that you all are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine, for your comment. The Regional Planning Council always looks to incorporate, when possible, community input, and we do ask for community input in all our projects. So if there are any concerns, areas of concerns like you are mentioning, that you would like for us to take a look at, please let us know. If you can reach out to us, that would be great.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from Lee County? We have transportation and emergency management, if anyone's interested in adding any comments. If not, we can move forward. And last but not least, Sarasota County. I think we had Rachel online earlier, but I think she dropped off.
The CHNEP is also working with Sarasota County on their adaptation action area planning.
With the county or the city?
Sorry, with Sarasota County.
Okay, thank you, Serena. Any other final comments or feedback to provide to the Regional Planning Council on any matters related to resiliency work across the region? And again, the 6-county footprint of Charlotte, Collier, Glades, Henry, Lee, and Sarasota. All right, without further ado, we want to thank you all for your valuable input today. This is exactly the kind of feedback that helps strengthen our regional efforts. Next steps, Rebecca and myself will be compiling today's feedback, sharing a summary and timeline of our regional resiliency efforts and coordinating future meetings as we move forward. If you have any additional thoughts after today, please don't hesitate to reach out. We want to thank you again for your time and participation, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you all.
Thank you all for joining.